Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving straight into a genuinely fascinating historical mystery. Why human civilization independently sparked in only a handful of very specific places. Think about it. Around 5,500 years ago, in a river valley in what is now Iraq, humans built something that had literally never existed before, a city. And then, completely separately, with absolutely zero contact and no shared knowledge, it happened again and again. But here's the kicker. It didn't happen everywhere. So today, we're going to unpack exactly why that is.
Okay, let's dive into this mind-blowing anomaly. Despite our incredibly long history, pristine state formation, and by that I mean civilizations arising without any outside influence, is incredibly rare. We are talking about the exact same human species here. We all have the same brains, we all have the same 200,000 years of evolutionary history behind us. So why there? Why did this monumental shift happen in such a concentrated way, leaving the vast majority of the globe entirely devoid of independent urban centers? To solve this global puzzle together, here's our roadmap. First, we'll look at the 6 pristine states. Second, we'll define early civilization. Third, we'll examine the essential starter kit. Fourth, the geography trap. And finally, why nowhere else?
Let's kick things off with Section 1, the 6 pristine states.
Over a span of roughly 4,000 years, true independent civilization happened exactly 6 times. Archaeologists generally agree on this very short list of pristine states. What this means is that they formed with zero borrowing from a neighbor. Everywhere else on the planet, Europe, Southeast Asia, most of Africa, got their states through trade, contact, or conquest by an existing power. Something incredibly rare had to line up independently 6 separate times. The stars truly had to align.
Moving right along to Section 2, defining early civilization. Before we figure out why these 6 locations succeeded, we need a shared baseline. Back in 1950, V. Gordon Childe gave us this urban revolution framework. He showed us that an early civilization isn't just about farming, it's really defined by surplus and density. You need a surplus large enough to feed full-time specialists, like priests and artisans. You need public architecture, organized long-distance trade, and record-keeping. It's this massive, monumental transformation from everyone growing their own food to a highly specialized, interdependent network of people packed into dense quarters.
But take a close look at what is glaringly missing from that checklist. Kings? Centralized rule was never actually a guarantee. We tend to think of ancient cities and immediately picture powerful pharaohs or despotic emperors ruling with an iron fist from day one. But the data? Well, the data tells a totally different story. The requirement was a complex society, not necessarily a sole dictator sitting at the top of a pyramid.
In fact, anthropologists David Graeber and David Wengrow brilliantly point out that many early settlements, like those in Mesopotamia or Teotihuacan, had surprisingly flat, egalitarian social structures. For a good while, these massive population centers operated without clear centralized rulers. It really proves that early civilization was deeply diverse in its political experimentation. It wasn't just some straight, inevitable line to absolute monarchy.
Which brings us to Section 3, the essential starter kit.
Jared Diamond points out a stark geographical contrast in what raw materials people actually had to work with. The Fertile Crescent? They hit the biological jackpot. They had high-calorie wild wheat and animals that basically didn't panic in captivity. Mesoamerica, on the other hand, had to spend centuries painstakingly, selectively breeding maize just to make it edible. And they had absolutely no large domesticable mammals. No horses, no draft animals. Just think about the sheer difference in difficulty between casually fencing in a cow versus spending 500 years trying to turn a tiny, hard grass seed into a massive cob of corn. The biological starting lines were just incredibly uneven. Adding to those required ingredients, we have Carl Wittfogel's heavily debated hydraulic hypothesis. He suggests that managing complex water systems across different villages demanded some form of centralized authority just to resolve disputes. I mean, think about it. Canals, dikes, and flood management across dozens of farming communities. Those are massive coordination problems. Someone had to organize the labor and figure out who gets the water. And once that authority figure or group existed, well, it tended to calcify into permanent political power.
Now for the real turning point of our explainer, Section 4, the geography trap.
You see, rich farmland alone wasn't enough to build a state. Anthropologist Robert Carnero proposed this absolutely incredible idea called circumscription theory. People only submitted to centralized power when they were boxed in by hostile terrain and literally had nowhere to run. In an open landscape, if two villages fight, the loser just packs up, walks over the hill, and starts fresh. No big deal. But if you are in the Nile Valley, flanked by harsh desert on both sides, or on the Peruvian coast, squeezed tightly between the ocean and the Andes, you can't run. You are completely trapped.
This creates a grim but honestly inescapable logic of state formation. Farming villages fight over agricultural surplus, but geographic borders block the losers from escaping. When losers in local conflicts can't physically disperse, they are conquered. They're absorbed, they're taxed. Do that enough times over enough generations, and you don't just have neighboring villages anymore. You have a rigid class hierarchy. You have a state.
Let's look at how this trap plays out across completely different environments over time. Around 3500 BCE, Sumer faces extreme desert circumscription. A few hundred years later, Egypt is boxed in by the harsh desert surrounding the predictable Nile. The Andes, squeezed between the Pacific and towering mountains. Even Mesoamerica was geographically trapped, especially without the wheel or draft animals to easily move away. 6 totally unique environments, ranging from floodplains to mountain valleys, all triggering the exact same trap. They had unique individual pressures, sure, but the underlying coordination model remains stunningly consistent.
So, we arrive at our final section, why nowhere else?
If the Fertile Crescent had the perfect starter kit, why didn't this happen independently in, say, Europe or sub-Saharan Africa? Well, it wasn't about capability at all. It was about this exact stack of rare conditions. Europe was highly fragmented by mountains, leaving borders open for people to simply walk away and disperse. Australia had low rainfall and lacked those key domesticable species. And while sub-Saharan Africa built massive, incredibly complex societies like Great Zimbabwe, they largely formed after contact with existing trade networks, which makes them secondary rather than pristine states. I want to leave you with a thought. Civilization wasn't just some inevitable triumph of human genius. It happened because 6 different populations independently ran into a wall they couldn't climb over. They had nowhere left to run, so they had to build upward or live under someone else's rule. If the very foundation of our modern world required such a specific, rare, and honestly brutal set of geographic pressures to force us together, what does that tell us about the stability of the societies we live in today?